The acceptance letter trembled in Eleanor Hart's hands, but not because she was excited. It shook because she was furious. Another man in Red Mesa had decided she was unfit for marriage, and this time he had written it plainly. Your hunger for learning is unnatural. In 1875, in a dusty Arizona town that barely had a schoolhouse, a woman who understood Latin was considered a danger. A woman who could explain the movement of planets was treated like a threat. And for 3 long years, Eleanor had been told in 100 small ways that she was too much, too smart, too strange, too opinionated, too everything. Now she stood alone in her empty schoolhouse, watching the sunset bleed across the desert like a cut she couldn't stop. The wooden desk sat silent. Chalk dust floated in the still air. Her books, her most loyal companions, lay stacked on her desk. Her mother had once called her love for learning dangerously impractical, and maybe she had been right. Eleanor was educated, capable, and independent, but in Red Mesa those qualities were not admired. They were punished. As she stared out past the window glass, she considered a future where she would always be alone. Maybe being intelligent really was a sentence, not a gift. Then she saw it, dust rising on the horizon. A cattle drive, a big one. Dozens of riders. Hundreds of longhorns. A wall of sound, hooves pounding, cows bawling, men shouting. The kind of ruckus that made every resident in Red Mesa step outside just to watch. Eleanor felt the schoolhouse tremble slightly as the herd passed the edge of town, moving with the steady rhythm of men who had spent their lives in the saddle. She didn't know it yet, but everything in her world was about to shift. Before she could step away from the window, another knock echoed through the room. She expected Martha Sullivan, the town's kind-hearted gossip, to return with more pity and soft words. But when Eleanor opened the door, her heart jolted. A man stood there, tall, weathered, broad-shouldered, his dark hair curled slightly at the ends, touched by dust and sun. His grey eyes, sharp and steady, met hers with a quiet confidence. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "sorry to bother you. I'm looking for the schoolhouse." "You found it," Eleanor replied, though she had to force her voice to stay steady. "I'm Miss Hart." "How can I help you?" "I'm Caleb Wilder," he said, "trail boss for the herd you saw coming through. We'll be here till morning. I heard the teacher might have a map of the country north of here. I'm heading to new grazing land and want to make sure we're taking the right trail." A trail boss wanting a map? That was unusual. Men like him followed instinct, stories, and the memory of the open range. They rarely asked anyone for help, least of all a schoolteacher. "You want to see maps?" she asked carefully. "Yes, ma'am, if you have them. And I can pay for your time." "That won't be necessary." She stepped aside. "Come in." Caleb removed his hat as he entered, filling the quiet schoolhouse with his presence. Eleanor felt her throat tighten in a way she didn't understand. He studied the maps pinned on the wall, his attention sharp and sincere. When he leaned in close to examine the territorial survey, Eleanor found herself moving beside him, pointing out canyons and ridges, explaining contour lines and valley paths. He didn't interrupt her. He didn't look bored. He didn't look threatened. He looked fascinated. "You know a lot about this," Caleb said, finally glancing at her. "I've been working cattle near 15 years, and no one's ever explained why maps are the way they are." "Makes sense now." Eleanor froze. She waited for the patronizing tone, the joke about women knowing too much, the sideways smile that always made her shrink. But Caleb only watched her with curiosity, not judgment. Most men had treated her intelligence like a flaw. Caleb treated it like a lantern. She showed him how the river valley east of Red Mesa offered safer passage than the canyon trail. He leaned close enough for her to smell leather, sweat, and the faint scent of sage. She tried to ignore it, but her heart betrayed her. "This helps a lot," he said. "You've saved us days of trouble." "It's just reading the map," she murmured. "No, Miss Hart," he said quietly. "It's understanding the land." A long silence stretched between them, warm and strange. Then Caleb straightened, clearing his throat. "Miss Hart, could I ask something else?" "Yes?" "Could you teach me how to read maps the way you do?" Eleanor lost her breath. "Teach you?" "If you'd be willing," he said. "I can ride back here once a week. I don't want to stay ignorant. Makes me a danger to my men." No one had ever asked her to teach them anything beyond basic reading and sums. No man had ever wanted to learn what she loved. No man had ever looked at her mind like it was something worth admiring. Her pulse hammered in her ears. "Why would you want me to teach you?" she whispered. Caleb met her eyes with a steady honesty that shook her. "Because I want to understand the world better than I do now, and because you know things I don't, things I'd like to learn." Eleanor swallowed hard. "All right," she said. "Yes, I'll teach you." Caleb's shoulders eased, not in relief, but in something gentler. "Thank you, Miss Hart." They spent another hour together, and Eleanor found herself laughing, actually laughing, as he joked about the terrible maps he'd followed in the past. When he finally stood to leave, the sun had dropped low, turning the windows gold. "Same time next week?" he asked. "Yes," she said softly. He tipped his hat. "See you Saturday, Miss Hart." After he left, Eleanor noticed the atlas and surveying manual he'd brought were still on her desk. She picked them up, holding the worn covers to her chest. Had he forgotten them? Or had he left them to promise he'd return? She didn't know. But she smiled for the first time in months. And deep inside her chest, something long buried, something she thought she'd lost, breathed awake. Hope. Eleanor spent the morning pacing her small living quarters behind the schoolhouse, checking the clock every few minutes. She felt foolish for caring so much about a simple lesson, but she couldn't help it. No student had ever made her nervous before. No student had ever made her heart beat faster, with every passing minute. But Caleb Wilder was not like anyone she had met in Red Mesa. By the time Saturday arrived, every map, every notebook, every chalkboard in the schoolhouse was arranged with precise care. Eleanor tried to convince herself she was simply being thorough, but deep down she knew the truth. She wanted to impress him. At exactly 2 o'clock, the sound of hooves echoed down the dusty street. She peeked through the window before she could stop herself. There he was, Caleb Wilder. Sitting straight in the saddle, his black gelding moving with slow, steady confidence. He dismounted and brushed dust from his coat, not enough to seem vain, but just enough for her to notice the small effort he'd made. Eleanor stepped back from the window quickly, pressing a hand to her chest. She took a slow breath, reminding herself she was a teacher, a professional, a sensible woman. The knock came, right on time. She opened the door before he could even lower his hand. "Mr. Wilder," she said, hoping her smile wasn't too eager. "I brought something," Caleb said, holding out a folded paper. His expression hovered somewhere between proud and uncertain. "I did homework." Eleanor blinked in surprise and opened the paper, her breath caught. It was a hand-drawn map, rough but honest, of the valley where his camp sat. He had marked the water source, traced the slopes, even attempted contour lines the way she'd described. "This," Eleanor whispered, running a finger along the pencil lines. "Caleb, this is excellent." He looked away for a moment, almost embarrassed. "Figured if you were taking time to teach me, I should practice." She studied the map again. For a first attempt, it was remarkable. "You walked the area to verify the elevations." 3 evenings, he admitted. "Wanted to make sure I got it right." Eleanor felt warmth bloom in her chest. An unfamiliar warmth. No man had ever taken her instruction seriously. No man had ever tried this hard to learn something she valued. "You have a natural eye," she murmured. Caleb shrugged. "I had a good teacher." His words settled over her like sunlight. They worked together for nearly 2 hours. Eleanor explained scale and symbols again, guiding his hand as he redrew certain lines. Caleb listened intently, asking questions that showed he wasn't simply memorizing, he was thinking, connecting ideas, seeing patterns. Most of Red Mesa's men dismissed science as nonsense. Caleb talked about it like it mattered. "Miss Hart," he said during a short break while she made tea, "you mentioned vegetation types on the map last time. How do you know what cattle will find to graze just by a symbol?" Eleanor brightened. She couldn't help it. "That's a perfect question. Vegetation tells you about rainfall, soil, even temperature, all things cattle depend on." She set the tea down and pulled out another map. "These markings here, see how they cluster along the water? That means deeper soil, more moisture. That's where your herd will find the best grazing." Caleb leaned in closer. Never knew a map could say so much. Most people don't, she said softly. I'm not most people. The way he said it, steady, certain, with those grey eyes holding hers, made Eleanor's heart stutter. And then that moment passed, replaced by more questions, more notes, more determined study. She had never met a man who wanted to learn this badly. It made her want to teach even more. When the lesson finally ended, the sun was beginning to set. The golden light filled the schoolhouse, warming the walls and softening everything it touched. I should head back, Caleb said reluctantly. It'll be dark soon. Yes, of course, Eleanor said, though disappointment tugged at her. He gathered his hat, but paused at the door. Miss Hart, may I? Yes, Eleanor asked when he didn't finish. May I call you Eleanor? The room felt suddenly still. You may, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, if you like. His mouth curved into a small, genuine smile. Then you should call me Caleb. Very well, Caleb. He nodded, as if storing away the sound of his name in her voice. Then he stepped outside. But halfway down the steps, he turned back again. Oh, I brought something else. Eleanor hadn't even noticed the small wrapped package under his arm. He handed it to her, looking almost shy. It's for the school. Or for your teaching. Thought it might help. Inside were 2 books, an atlas newer than any she owned, and a surveying manual worn but well cared for. Caleb, her voice cracked. These are expensive. They're tools, he said simply. Tools belong where they'll be used. She had no words. Not one man in Red Mesa had ever encouraged her studies. Yet this cowboy, who'd only known her a few weeks, kept doing it with every quiet choice. When he finally rode away, Eleanor stood in the doorway long after he disappeared from sight. She clutched the books to her chest, the way a child might hold a promise. For the first time in 3 years, she felt something gentle and dangerous blooming inside her. Hope. But it wasn't only hope. It was something that scared her far more. Attachment. Eleanor stood frozen in the middle of the schoolhouse, long after Caleb left that evening. The room felt different now. The walls seemed warmer. The air felt softer. Even the worn wooden desks looked less lonely. She touched her lips with trembling fingers, remembering the gentle pressure of his kiss, the warmth of his hands, the truth in his voice when he said she deserved to be seen. No one had ever said such words to her. No one had ever meant them. But excitement came with fear, a deep, old fear. A fear built from years of rejection and disappointment. A fear that whispered she should be careful, that life rarely gave her anything without snatching it away again. Eleanor pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady her racing heart. She had loved teaching. She had loved learning. But she had never allowed herself to imagine love, not real love, not the kind that came from respect and admiration. She had convinced herself it did not exist, not for a woman like her. Yet here she was, shaking because a trail boss with grey eyes had kissed her like she mattered. The next morning she woke before dawn. Her sleep had been restless. Every time she drifted off, she dreamed of Caleb standing in the schoolhouse doorway, saying her name in that steady way of his. When she rose from bed, she smoothed her dress carefully and braided her hair with more attention than usual. It felt foolish, but she wanted to look like someone worth choosing. She stepped outside, letting the cool desert morning wash over her. The sky was pale blue, touched with pink on the edges, the calm before the heat returned. Eleanor took a deep breath and tried to settle herself. She had work to do, lessons to plan, a life to continue living. But her thoughts refused to behave. Every few minutes she found herself glancing toward the north road, wondering if Caleb's herd had moved on, wondering if he had thought about her as much as she had thought about him. She knew he would be back the next Saturday, but the week suddenly felt much too long. By mid-morning she heard footsteps approaching the schoolhouse. Sharp, quick footsteps. Martha Sullivan appeared in the doorway, her kind eyes wide with curiosity. "Eleanor Hart," Martha said, hands on her hips. "You have something to tell me." Eleanor stiffened. "About what?" "Do not play innocent," Martha said, shutting the door behind her. "Half the town saw you standing outside with that trail boss last night. And he looked at you like a thirsty man staring at a well." Heat flooded Eleanor's face. "Martha, nothing inappropriate happened?" Martha raised an eyebrow. I did not say inappropriate. I said interesting. And I want to know if you are all right. Eleanor hesitated, then she sank into her chair. Martha, he respects me. The words came out cracked and soft. Martha's stern expression melted into warmth. Oh, Eleanor, she said gently, coming to sit beside her. I am glad, truly glad. I am afraid, Eleanor admitted. He is leaving soon. He has a herd to move. A life to live. And I am here. Did he say he was leaving you behind? Martha asked. No. Then stop deciding the ending before the story has a chance to breathe. Eleanor let out a shaky breath. She wished she could bottle Martha's boldness and drink it. The rest of the week passed slowly. Eleanor taught her students with her usual energy, but her thoughts drifted constantly. She found herself scanning the horizon during recess, searching for movement. Her nights were filled with restless tossing, replaying every moment with Caleb, wondering what the future could look like. When Saturday finally arrived, she thought she might faint from the tension. She paced the schoolhouse with hands trembling, adjusting her dress over and over again. When the clock's hand moved near 2, she stood at the window, gripping the sill so hard her knuckles turned white. Right at the hour, a figure appeared on the road. Caleb. Riding toward her with purpose, his hat low against the sun, his shoulders steady in the saddle, he dismounted and tied his horse at the post, then paused as if gathering himself. Eleanor stepped away from the window quickly, afraid he would see her watching. He knocked once, firm, sure. She opened the door and their eyes met in a way that made her breath catch. Caleb removed his hat, holding it at his side. Eleanor, he said in a voice that warmed her straight to her bones. Caleb. He stepped inside, but instead of moving toward the maps, he stopped a few feet from her. I need to talk to you, he said. Her heart raced. About what? Caleb exhaled slowly. About last week, about what happened. I want to be clear. Eleanor swallowed hard. All right. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. But it was not a map, it was a deed. She recognized the official stamp before she even unfolded it fully. Caleb, what is this? You remember I told you I was heading north, he said, to new grazing land. That land is real, it is good land, and I have been saving for years to claim it. I plan to build a home there, a ranch, something permanent. Eleanor stared at him, confused and breathless. Caleb continued. And I want you to know that if you choose me, if you choose us, you would not be following a wandering cowboy with no roots. You would be building a life with a man who wants to stay, a man who wants a partner. Eleanor gripped the deed tightly. Caleb, this is too much. No, he said softly, it is not enough, but it is all I have right now. She felt tears sting her eyes. Why are you doing this? Because I love you, Eleanor Hart, because I know what I want. Because you are the first person who has ever made me feel like I could be more than what I am. A sob escaped her throat before she could stop it. Caleb stepped closer. I am not asking you to give up teaching, he said gently. I know how important it is to you, and I would never take that away. But I am asking if you would think about building something with me, a life, a future. Eleanor wiped at her eyes, overwhelmed. I am afraid, she whispered. I know, Caleb said. I am afraid too, but I would rather be afraid with you than safe without you. Her heart cracked open. She reached for his hand slowly, feeling the rough calluses against her palm. It was warm, strong, steady. Caleb, she said softly, I do not want to lose you. You will not, he promised, bringing her hand to his chest. Not unless you push me away. And I hope you will not. Eleanor took a shaky breath. I will not, she said. Relief washed across his face. A relief so raw and honest it made her chest ache. He leaned down and kissed her gently. Not rushed, not desperate. A slow, steady kiss, filled with the promise of a life where she did not have to shrink or hide or pretend. A life where she was loved for her mind, her strength, her curiosity, her stubbornness, her everything. When they parted, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. I want to learn from you for the rest of my life, he murmured, if you will let me. Eleanor smiled through her tears. Then I will teach you, she whispered, for as long as you want. Outside, the desert wind carried the scent of sage and dust. Inside, the schoolhouse no longer felt lonely. It felt like the beginning of something brave and beautiful. Eleanor had been too educated for every man in Red Mesa. But not for Caleb Wilder. Never for him.